Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Meadows, and I serve as the Director of the Division of Energy Assistance here within the Office of Community Services and the Administration for Children and Families. On behalf of the division, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on completing the Federal Fiscal Year 2023 Performance Measures, which is Module 2 of the FY 2023 Performance Data Form. Today's webinar will be presented by Melissa Torgerson of Verve Associates and Dan Bouch from Apprise. Melissa is a former LIHEAP director with experience implementing performance management, and Dan has helped lead training and technical assistance for LIHEAP for several years now. Go ahead and go to slide 2, please. Today's webinar will focus on the key items needed to complete the fiscal year 2023 performance measures, which are due in the Online Data Collection System, or OLDC, on January 31st, 2024. The purpose of today's webinar is to review the key requirements required for completing Module 2, to review the data you need to prepare the report, and to review the process for submitting and updating the report. The audience for today's webinar is state LIHEAP coordinators and program staff that assist with completing the performance measures. If you have staff unable to attend today or you want to hear the training again, today's webinar will be repeated on January 11th. It is the same webinar with the same content. We truly appreciate you all joining us today and hope today's training is valuable. With that, Melissa, please take it away.
Thanks, Megan. Welcome to another LIHEAP reporting webinar. Today's webinar is 60 minutes long, just like the others. And as with the others, there's a handout section in your go-to sidebar where all of the handouts relevant to this webinar and the Module 2 of the Performance Data Form are posted. This webinar is being recorded and will be published on the ACF YouTube channel. And as Megan mentioned, it will be repeated as well. So if you listen to this and decide you need to hear it again, or you have staff members you want to attend that aren't able to come today, there will be repeats and recordings. Next slide, please. So we answer questions at the end of these webinars, which means we'd like you to ask them throughout using the question box. And this is in the sidebar as well. And there's a little kind of map and diagram here to show you where that is. As you submit questions, they'll be reviewed and we'll respond to them at the end of the webinar. If we run out of time or there are lots of extra questions, we will get back to you after the webinar with a response. Now, just like our other slide decks, this one is very dense. It's meant to provide a lot of technical assistance, as we know that many of you will go back to these slides after this webinar as you're putting together your report, or you might even hand this off to a staff person that is helping you. So this is kind of your index or your chapters, table of contents, so that you can easily find different sections of this webinar deck as needed. We're going to start with a poll, like we always do, because we're interested in knowing how you feel as you're coming into this webinar about Module 2 of the Performance Data Form, which is about performance measures. Are you not at all prepared, meaning you haven't turned attention to this? Are you a little prepared? You're aware that it's out there, but you haven't planned or started yet. You're mostly prepared. You're already thinking about this and you're working out nuances. Maybe you've started sending stuff to your vendors. Or you're very prepared, you're already on top of it and you understand it, and you're just attending this to find out about anything new and get some reminders.
Looks like the answers have stopped coming in, so I will go ahead and close it.
So it looks like most of you have at least started thinking about this. You're aware, maybe, but you haven't planned yet. That's about 40%. And then the remainder of you are either mostly or very prepared. And so hopeful that this webinar will get you into gear and maybe answer some of those outstanding questions that you have. And we will do another poll at the end to find out whether or not the webinar was successful. I'm going to turn it over to Dan now to talk about federal reports.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again for joining us today. So here's the schedule of all the required federal reports. These are in order of when they are due. So we've had webinars on some of the earlier ones, and we're focused on Module 2 of the Performance Data Form today on the bottom. And even though January 31st seems a little bit far away, this report requires getting some data and preparing it. And so we're going to talk about the steps that are involved in making sure you can get there. All right, so just to orient us, the performance measures are part of the performance data form. So there's one report in OLDC called the performance data form. And that has the grantee survey, which is about the obligations of your LIHEAP funds. We talked about that on Tuesday. And it has Module 2, which we're talking about today, and an optional extension of the performance measures under Module 3, which we're not going to focus on for this webinar. We're mainly going to focus on the required Module 2. So both Module 1 and 2 are in this performance data form, but the information you need and the approaches to complete them are each a little bit different. So the background with the performance measures is that this report was developed over a number of years with input from several state grant recipients to have information that can help understand the impact of LIHEAP on the households that are receiving assistance. So the report was created and first mandatory for all states in 2016, and it focuses on 3 types of information. It collects statistics to understand the energy burden of LIHEAP households and how the energy burdens are being impacted by LIHEAP benefits. Second, it captures information on how LIHEAP is restoring energy service for households that have lost energy service for different reasons, like disconnection, running out of fuel, having inoperable equipment. And third, it collects information on how LIHEAP's preventing those losses from occurring by providing assistance before a critical crisis like that has occurred. So the performance measures provide this information, and it can be used to produce targeting information to track progress over time and to help you and to help the public assess how well LIHEAP's doing and ways that you might change your targeting approaches in the future. In 2020, OCS updated the report in order to allow for the collection of additional information on supplemental funds that were being issued during the pandemic. So the report was divided into submodules 2A, 2B, and 2C. A was the same information that had been collected on all households. B was to report on the subset that were assisted with supplemental CARES funds. And submodule 2C was to report on households that were assisted with the American Rescue Plan Act funds. So that's what the report has looked like in recent years. And this information that goes into the performance measures is used. So it's first of all used to provide information to decision makers and to the public. It's available in the data warehouse. But it can also help you in running your programs to be able to understand the energy burdens that different households with different fuel types face, to assess your benefit targeting procedures and see if they're meeting your goals, and to track progress over time in how you're doing preventing or alleviating emergencies. So it's a very important report. Here's examples of where you can find this information. The LIHEAP Data Warehouse has reports that you can grab that show information by state. And then on the right side of the screen, there's one-page documents called executive summaries that are made that show what this report collects in a more visual format. So we encourage you to look at those or to reach out if you don't know where yours is and want to see it. All right, so we're going to talk about the 2023 performance measures now. Okay, so the first major point we want you all to know is that there's no substantive changes to the performance measures from last year. So there's no new items being asked. There's no changes to the form layout. So the form will look the same and will ask for the same pieces of information. But there's one important item to note, and that's that most of you have fully expended your supplemental American Rescue Plan Act funds and your older Supplemental CARES Act funds prior to the start of fiscal year 2023. So those, you gave out benefits using those funds maybe in 2020, 2021, 2022, but most of you didn't have any remaining funds for 2023. So that means for this report, you just have to fill out Module 2A, the main module, with the information on bill payment assisted households. We're going to talk more about what information you need, but that means that you won't have to report separately by CARES and ARPA. Now, there may be some of you that had, you had obligated all of the American Rescue Plan funds, but there was some smaller amount that you didn't yet expend as benefits. Maybe you did that in early 2023. And so if that is you, you would still want to report on the supplemental submodules to be able to show the impact specifically for households that received just those ARPA funds. So that's, in general, most of you will just complete 2A, but if you did provide benefits with ARPA or CARES, you would still want to report those additional sections. So there'll be an announcement coming from OCS soon in the form of an action transmittal for this report. The due date is in January 31st. And while this report in recent years has been submitted in a spreadsheet, OCS has been working with Grant Solutions to have the form available again in the OLDC system, the same place your model plan is and your household report. And so the goal is that this report will be available there. And you'll be asked to submit it in the same way you submit your model plan or your household report. Because the due date is in a few months, we wanted to make sure you have resources in your hands to assist you with getting ready. So in the handouts, you'll see a number of different resources we put there. We're not trying to overwhelm you, but we're trying to give you different tools that you or your staff working on the report can use. One of them is newer. We made a spreadsheet that has some helpful examples of what your data may look like and how you would put it together and prepare it for the report. So I'm going to show you a little bit of that on the next slide. But we also have a check before you submit document like we do for the other reports that just lists some steps to check in your report before you submit it. And we attach the instructions from last year that are still relevant because the report hasn't been changed. So we encourage you to use those instructions to get started. So that new spreadsheet that's attached as a handout, this is just some images showing what that looks like. This gives you an example of a small group of households, 13 households, the pieces of information you need. Some of them come from your own program data, and some of them would come from utility vendors or fuel delivery vendors. There's some calculations and formulas to calculate energy burden for these households, and then how that gets ultimately added up and reported, averaged and reported in the performance measures report. Okay, now we're going to talk about steps you should be taking to prepare to submit the report by January. I'll turn it to Melissa.
All right, so this is my favorite part of the webinar because it's important that you all are thinking about some concrete ways to get this moving. And so to start, it's about making sure you're collecting data from vendors, because for many of you, this is the most time-consuming part of this part of the report. So to complete the report, each state is required to request and collect data from a sample of energy vendors that provide services to LIHEAP clients. And this is about collecting data from the top vendors by fuel type who provide service to LIHEAP households. So some of you have heard us say top 5, electric and gas, top 10 of fuel, oil, propane, and other. And so we have an actual vendor selection supplement. It's linked here, and it helps you identify who those top vendors are if you don't already know who you're going to be going to get data. Now, on the next slide, this is the way that we recommend most states go out and get the data. Now, there are exceptions, people who have automated data exchanges already in place where they get the data real time, or you may already have something set up. But for most states, it's about identifying the top energy vendors for each main heating fuel type, send the selected vendors a request for annual expenditure data for LIHEAP recipient households, and receive that back from the vendors. Now, we have templates up the wazoo for you. So if you aren't already doing this or you're completely new, we have a template that we give out to people that says, here is one way you could request the data for vendors. You fill out this section and you tell them you want this other section filled out by them. And so don't, if you're new, please reach out, because we have lots of resources that we've helped people do this with. Can we go one step back? One thing that I would just add here is to keep in mind that you are, for this report, you're required to get information, and Dan will hit on this again, from both the main heating fuel vendor and the electric vendor. So this isn't, I mean, you may be reaching out to vendors and asking for data for people you did not make a payment to. So if you only make payments, for example, to main heating fuel vendors, you should also be collecting their electric account information to go out and collect their electric account information, even if you didn't make a payment there. So I just want to underscore that, and Dan, of course, will talk about that again. All right, you can go back ahead to slide 22 or 21. So number 2 is about combining the vendor data. So you've gone out, you've requested vendor data, you've gotten it back, and you should take a look at it. Inevitably, there's some weird outlier in there you may need to call the vendor about, or something might not look right. But once you get it back and you feel comfortable with it, you're going to need to merge that data with complete annual data from your own LIHEAP system. Now, you can use the same queries you used last year. There's not, you know, if nothing's changed and your funding sources haven't changed, then you probably can use similar queries. But the idea here is you're wanting to mush together those annual costs for each household together with the other data you need, which is their annual income and their annual sum of benefits. So you need all of that to calculate their energy burden. And once again, Dan mentioned that there is an example of data calculations and reporting spreadsheet attached to this webinar, and it really helps you understand the logic of how each data piece comes in and then how you're expected to put it together and compile it into this required report. We assist a lot of households with that. Our contract include, or I'm sorry, a lot of states with this. So if you have all the pieces and you're staring at them and not quite sure how to get them merged, please call us. We can help you with that. Just because you have the data together and in a pretty report, you have one more big step to go, and that's getting it into OLDC. And for some people, luck is not with them when they access OLDC. So it's important to be thinking about this before you're in a hurry to submit your report. It requires credentials to both access and submit reports. And so we recommend you go in and make sure that you have access and your login isn't expired, and that you have people with the right certifications ready to go so that they can go in and take steps to submit this report. And Dan has gone ahead and put what you'll see on your screen and what you need to be looking for when you are ready to get into OLDC and put the data in. Next slide. And I think this is a really brilliant piece of advice. Step number 4, every year, as some of you know, a prize is responsible for reviewing these reports and identifying any discrepancies, and they will call and email you and let you know if they see something and ask you to clarify, or maybe get on the phone with you and work with you to fix it. And so we really recommend that you go back to FY 2022 and take a look at prizes, emails, or any correspondence you may have had with them to understand and make sure you correct any issues prior to them having to call you this year. Oftentimes the mistakes are in a query, so making sure that query has been updated and fixed will save you this process again for FY 2023. And now Dan's going to go over key reporting steps for section 5 of the report.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about what's needed. Now we're going to look at how the report is structured and what each area of the report is asking for. So within the performance measures, there's 3 sections, section 5, 6, and 7. Section 5 is the major one that requires the most information, so we're going to spend the most time on that. And then we'll look at section 6 and 7. So we're focused on the energy targeting part in section 5. So in this section, you're asked to provide information in 3 parts, part A, B, and C. A is a simple breakdown of households, so it's 1 line of numbers. But part B and part C ask for multiple statistics on groups of households. So we're going to look at how this works together. So this is what the form looks like. It looks a little intimidating when you're first looking at it, of course, but you can see in blue is part A, green is part B, orange is part C. And all the white lines are lines where you're reporting information. All the gray lines are lines where the report is going to automatically calculate the information based on what you've entered. So the report does some of the work for you, but there's still a number of things to enter. And you can see the columns on the right side are by fuel type. So you're going to enter specific information for natural gas household, main heat households, and for propane main heat households, etc. Okay, so part A is asking you in this report to report the total number of households that received a LIHEAP benefit to help pay for energy expenses. And that in the reports is called bill payment assistance. So that's represented here by this blue circle. That would be everyone that got a benefit in fiscal year 2023 to help with their bills. And so let's say there were 30,000 households that were assisted in 2023 with that kind of assistance. You would want to report those in part A, and part A is going to ask you to report the total, but to also report how many of that breakdown of 30,000 households by each main heating type. And normally that's something you would collect on your application. What fuel type do you use for heating? This is also a number that goes in your household report that we talked about at a prior webinar. So that same 30,000 number goes on a line in the household report and then also goes here, but with more detail on heating types. So the performance measures then wants you to report information on a subset of those 30,000 households that you have energy expenditure data for. So that's represented here by the green circle. So the reason the green circle is smaller than the blue circle is because, as Melissa said, you're going to target a sample of your energy providers, your top energy providers. So there'll be some households that you didn't request the expenditure data from their particular vendor, or you may have households where you have their heating bill but not their electric bill. So part B is going to be a subset of your total assisted households. For Part B, the first thing is you have to report the total number of households that you have the data for. So in this example, it's 20,000. Then you're going to take data on those 20,000 households, and you're going to calculate the average income for those households, their average heating bill based on the vendor data you collected, and the average amount in LIHEAP assistance that they received, so their benefit amount. Now we're going to move to Part C. Part C is the last part that you need to enter information for. And for this part of the report, you're being asked to identify the high burden households from Part B. And that's defined as the top 25% that have the highest energy burdens. So Part C is another subset of Part B. That's the orange circle here. You're gonna report the total number of households, which in this case is 5,000, because that's 25% of 20,000. Then you're gonna report all the same statistics you reported in Part B, but just for those 5,000 households. So you can see the annual income, heating bill, LIHEAP benefit, also the electric bill. You're gonna calculate the averages again, and then the report's gonna compare information for the orange circle and the green circle to let you know how you're doing at targeting benefits and reducing energy burden. So that's kind of a visual representation of how the report works. Here's what pieces of information you need to be able to report on households in Parts B and also for the households selected for Part C. In blue are pieces of information that you would collect from that sample of vendors. So if you're reaching out to a utility company, that's one of your large utility companies that provides electricity and natural gas, you would want to ask them for the gas expenditure amounts and for the electricity expenditure amounts for households that received assistance in fiscal year 2023. Those two pieces of information come from your vendors, and then the orange color is information that you should have on your LIHEAP recipient household. So their annual income amount, their main heating type, and the total amount in benefits they received during 2023. So these 5 pieces of information you need, and if a household uses electricity for heat, they just have an electric bill, then they're going to have 4 pieces of information instead of 5. But anybody who gets reported in Part B is going to need the information shown on this slide. So we understand that many of you may have definitions for a high burden for your benefit determination procedures or your matrix, but for the purpose of the performance measures report, HHS has defined what they want high burden households to be. So there's a consistent definition across state grant recipients. And that definition is to pick the top 25% of households from Part B to include in Part C. To do that, there's a series of steps that you would need to take, and we're going to show that a little bit more visually, and that spreadsheet in the handouts also shows that. But the basic idea is for the households you collected energy expenditure data for, you need to calculate their total energy expenses, so their main heat plus their electric. Then you need to calculate each household's energy burden by taking their energy expenditures and dividing it from their income. And then you're going to need to sort them and draw the top 25%. So there's ways to do this, with queries. There's ways people use Excel and tools like that as well. And you'll see in bold at the bottom, we want to emphasize this isn't the top 25% within each fuel type. It's the top 25% overall, because some fuel types may have higher proportion of households that are high burden based on fuel prices and other reasons. So we want to make sure that you're selecting the top 25% overall and not just 25% by heating fuel type. So this is an example that shows the steps laid out. It's a little bit confusing looking at it, but if you just take a few minutes on your own and go step by step, the basic steps I just described are here. We have a number of households, that's each row going down. You see their main heating fuel, their income. The first step is to make sure you have their total energy expenses for a 12-month period. That's step one here, is that total amount. Step two is you're going to calculate each household's energy burden by taking their bill and dividing it, their total residential energy bill, and dividing it by their annual income. Households that are zero income or have a burden above 100%, you're going to want to, there's a step to set their energy burden at 100%. That's step three. The last step is to then sort by energy burden and pick the top 25%, which is represented here by the green box. So with these 5 steps, you can select the households for Part C and then calculate the statistics again for just that smaller group. Okay, next slide. All right, now we're going to look at section 6, which is restoration of lost service. So this is the second part of the performance measures. And one thing you're going to notice is that this is the same name and the same kind of information you also report in the quarterly report in a more limited fashion, but some of this is going to be relevant as well for what you're reporting in the quarterly report. So the restoration of service section is focused on gathering information on how many times LIHEAP assistance helped someone get energy service after it had been lost or unavailable to them. Here's an example. If a household runs out of fuel and LIHEAP provided fuel to them, then that occurrence would be reported here. If the same household ran out of fuel twice, then you would report both occurrences in this section. You can see on the bottom of the screen, there's 3 different lines in this section for different types of assistance that would have restored service. And you're also asked to break it down by the energy source where the benefit was applied. So to complete this section, you want to look at all LIHEAP assistance in 2023, and you want to identify benefits that help restore energy service. For most cases, that would be crisis assistance households. But if you provide regular assistance to households that are have faced disconnection or other instances like this, you would also want to count them here. So the difference here from some of the other reports is this is focused on occurrences, not households. So these numbers may not exactly match up with the households you assisted. So here's some examples of what counts as a restoration. Typically are disconnections where the household received LIHEAP assistance to restore their service. A household was completely out of their heating fuel and received a LIHEAP fuel payment or fuel delivery. Or there was equipment that was non-operable and was repaired or replaced with LIHEAP federal funds. There is a supplement that's available here and is linked in the slides on considerations when you're determining what counts as a service restoration. So if you have not seen that before, or if you're not sure, we encourage you to look at that document. Okay, the last section is section 7, and that's prevention of loss of service. So this is similar to the restoration section and has a similar kind of layout, but we're going to talk a little bit more about what preventions are. So we're moving now down to section 7. So with prevention of loss, the focus for this section is on how many different times during federal fiscal year 2023 there were instances where a household received LIHEAP assistance that helped prevent the imminent loss of energy service. And this is where the block grant nature of LIHEAP comes in. There isn't a one defined definition of what an imminent loss of energy service is. So it really can vary from state to state as to what constitutes an imminent loss. But in general, this means households that have received a disconnect notice or a past due notice, they report being low on fuel, or they have equipment that is failing and will need to be replaced. And LIHEAP provides a benefit to address that situation. Similar to the prior section, there's 3 lines here, and there's multiple columns where you're asked to report the total number of instances by the fuel type where the benefit was applied. So we're going to look at some examples. One example is a household receives a disconnect notice that their electricity will be shut off, for example, and they come in for LIHEAP assistance, and LIHEAP provides the assistance, and ultimately that their account is in good standing. Second example is households low on delivered fuel, and you may have a definition of what that means, and you provide assistance to help them have the fuel they need. And then finally, if they have heating equipment that's working, but not working as it should be working and is failing, and LIHEAP federal funds help repair or replace it. Those things are all kind of common examples of how LIHEAP prevented the loss of service. We also have a supplement linked here on this slide that talks about how different ways of thinking about imminent loss and at-risk households. So we encourage you to look at that. And really for this section, we want to make sure people are thinking broadly. So crisis assistance is one area people often think of with prevention, but for many of you, you may be providing regular benefits to households that are still facing things like disconnect notices. So if you have the information from your application and other places, you want to make sure you're reporting on every instance that qualifies as a prevention of loss, even if it wasn't ultimately a crisis benefit that helped prevent that loss. Okay, now we're going to look at some reporting guidance if you are one of those states that, one of the few states that may still need to report some information on your use of supplemental American Rescue Plan Act funds. We're just going to look at that very briefly. So with Module 2C, if you are one of those states, you're reporting all the same information we just went over, except it's going to be specific for the subset of households that received assistance with the ARPA funds during 2023. So same information, just restricted to that population group. Next slide. So if we look at what this looks like, it looks very similar to the main tab that you want to figure out how many households got assistance with those ARPA funds. Let's say it's 20,000. Then you want to look at those 20,000 and see who you collected the energy expenditure data from your vendors, from your sample of vendors. And then you're going to calculate all the same statistics as you would on the main Module 2A. Average income, average bills, average benefits. The main difference is that the benefit amount you would report here is just the benefit from the American Rescue Plan Act funds. And then Part C, you select the top 25% of those households and calculate all the same information. So the only change here, if you are one of these states, is you need to focus on households assisted with ARPA and the benefit amount associated with ARPA. And restoration and prevention, those Section 6 and Section 7, if you provided assistance with remaining ARPA funds, you, for these two sections, are going to report on any instances where the ARPA funds helped to restore lost service or prevent loss in some way. So they either fully or partially were used to help provide assistance in those instances. All right, so this is another cheat sheet table we made. So this might just be helpful for you to hang on to or to share with someone working on the report. And this just shows you for each section what information you need and just some useful information about where this should match with your household report. Okay, we're going to turn to some final reminders, and then we'll have some time for questions as well. Turn it back to Melissa.
Thanks, Dan. So we're just going to walk through these quickly so we have time for questions, but the report is due once again on January 31st, and this is the same day that Module 1 is due as well, the grantee survey, which we had a webinar on Tuesday about. All states must complete the main Module 2A, and we expect that the performance data form will be submitted in OLDC. If you need technical assistance, what you've seen here is that there are lots of different steps to getting this report done. And so if you're sensing at all that you're going to need help, or if one piece seems a little bit foggy to you, don't wait until we get closer to the report due date to ask for help. Ask us now, and we can help you get things ironed out so that you can get your report in on time. Next slide. So there are no substantive changes from last year, but just like we talked about in the grantee survey webinar, it's important to note that for most grant recipients, the CARES and ARPA funds are no longer applicable since they were exhausted and not used to provide benefits during FY 2023. If you expended remaining supplemental ARPA or CARES Act funds to provide benefits to households in 23, you should still complete the submodules. So if you had a few dollars left, we would, and you spent them in 2023, we would expect you to complete those other tabs. Next slide, please. Once again, OLDC is its own thing. And so we put this page of resources here for you, and we recommend that you hop in there early before your report is due to make sure that you have updated login information, and you're able to get in and access the report. It's accessed through Grant Solutions, which is not an enterprise site. And so you'll want to go in and get into this. And if you do run into problems, you can contact the Grant Solutions help desk directly, and we've listed both the phone number and the website here. To get the report into OLDC, you have to submit it, but submitting it is just the very last step. So individuals who have permission to certify and submit might be different. You need to find out who that is. If you're new, who is the person who actually has permission to certify the report in your in OLDC? It might not be you. And so it's important to find that out well before you are ready to report. There are going to be a few different steps. You're going to save it, validate it, then that certification process happens, and then you're going to submit that. So once again, we're telling you this so that you can account for the fact that there's a few different steps, and you need to give yourself time. That 5 minutes before the report is due is probably not going to be adequate for you to get this in unless you already have everything lined up. When you go in to enter your report, one of the things we've kind of said throughout these webinars is that there are validations built into OLDC that check the data you are reporting in one report against other data in other reports. And so there are lots of little validations that check within and around all the reports. And you can get two different kinds of error messages. You can get a warning message, and this is saying, oh, you might want to double check this, it might be wrong. And these are errors that might actually be right, but we want you to take a look at them, double check them, make sure they're accurate. And if they are accurate, leave a note. In fact, anytime you get an error message and you decide to ignore it and move on, you should be kind of triggered to leave a note so that we're not calling you to ask questions about that data. Now, fatal error messages are different. These are inconsistent math, things that are arithmetically impossible. And so if you're getting a fatal error message, you're not going to be able to move on. Now, if you get either a warning or an error that you don't understand or that you can't get past to submit your report, you can contact us for help, and we'll walk you through that. Once you submit the report, I mentioned this earlier, a prize is going to review it in more detail. And as soon as they do, they're going to email you to alert you to any issues or questions that they have. And we ask that you read and respond to that promptly so that if we need to, we can get in touch with you, have some back and forth discussion if necessary, so that we can help you fix it. And once it's fixed and complete, your liaison will accept it in OLDC. If you do later on decide, oh my gosh, we missed a whole subsection of households, or oh goodness, we made a real mistake in our coding and just noticed, then you will need to submit a revision in OLDC. These are awesome resources. I can't encourage you enough to take a look at this. There's a whole section on required reports in the LIHEAP Performance Management website that include all of the correspondence from OCS, form instructions, form kind of technical assistance and support documents, including things like the check before you submit document, which helps you walk through and validate your data before you even submit it. So this is great if you have an IT person or a research person or someone in your department who's putting together this data for you initially. Giving them this document so they can do an initial check themselves will save you a lot of time when you get to OLDC, and you can just skip past warning and error messages because you've already checked it. Your past year's data is there, especially for new directors. This might be helpful for providing context. And then all of last year's information is available at this link. So if they're missing pieces from this year because we're still waiting on it, you can absolutely go look at last year's. As Dan had mentioned throughout the webinar, there are really no substantive changes to the report. We have lots more webinars because we like webinars, and they're coming soon. So we did have a household report webinar earlier this month, I think, and we're going to have another one on December 5th for those of you who couldn't make it or want to hear it again or have staff that might need to hear it. We will have another LIHEAP grantee survey webinar on January 9th at 3 p.m. and then this one will be repeated on January 11th. So some people need to hear things more than once to absorb them, and we welcome you to attend again if you have any additional questions. The webinars will be mostly the same unless some of you identify things that we can improve or make better, and in which case we'll tweak it. So let's get to that. How helpful was this webinar in understanding what is needed to complete the FY 2023 performance measures? Was it not at all helpful, not too helpful, somewhat helpful, or very helpful? And keep in mind that this is kind of generic, but it's helpful to us. And if you have specific comments, things that you felt like weren't addressed that you really would like to see addressed, things about the organization, anything, please send it our way so that we can make these better for future sessions.
Looks like the responses have stopped coming in, so I'll go ahead and close it.
All right, so it looked like this was somewhat helpful for about 40% and very helpful for the remainder. For those of you who it was, well, for any of you, if there are pieces that you still are a little foggy about, or you have remaining questions, of course, we're going to take questions now, but we're also very happy to work with you or talk with you one-on-one after this webinar. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And I'll hand it over to Joseph and Dan to take questions. Oh, here's the diagram. Sorry, I forgot this slide. Here is the diagram you need in case you need to be need a reminder of how to submit questions in the question box.
So someone asked, if we're collecting data from the top vendors and we get information about propane, natural gas users, but the electric company is not one of the top 5 electric companies, can we exclude those households from parts B and C?
Yeah, that's a good question. So with collecting the vendor data, you do have to keep in mind, you want to, of course, look at your top vendors, but you also have to keep in mind that you do need their main heating, a household's main heating bill and their electricity bill. And there will be situations where you have one but not the other because of who you're selecting or where they're located. In that case, you are going to have households like that where maybe you have their propane bill, but you don't have their electric bill. And you would want to not include them in the report because you don't have a complete picture of that household's energy expenses. And the report's trying to get a complete picture across households of their energy burden. What we do recommend is if you know, for example, that your top electric companies are in a certain area, but maybe one of your top propane is not in that same area as those, you might want to consider looking at who the electric vendor is in that area and also reaching out to that electric vendor to try to collect data. So the requirement is for the top ones, but over time for your report to get more representative and provide better information, you can request it from additional vendors over time. And several states have done that as they've built up the capacity to do that, and that makes sure that you have good information that covers all areas. Anything else on that, Melissa?
Nope, I don't have anything else. That covered it.
Someone asked if they had ARPA payments approved at the end of September, but the payment was made in October and they pull only those paid, should that be reflected in the report for FY 2023?
Yes, so you have a number of different stages with households. They apply for assistance, in your system, they've been approved to receive it, and then there's a point when they get paid the assistance. In general, and Melissa can chime in too, we're focused on when the household received the assistance. And so for your 2023 reports that are due soon, your household report's going to ask you how many households did you assist during fiscal year 2023 with heating assistance, and how many of those heating assistance households got assisted with ARPA, for example. So you would want to report them there. And if you reported any kind of ARPA assistance in the household report, it would also apply to the performance measures. Now, there are, of course, instances where you might have assisted a really small number of households with ARPA and you don't have much vendor data for that small number. That's understandable. But if you provided supplemental payments to a large number, or actually provided the ARPA assistance to households in 2023, you're going to want to try to report them on that.
Yeah, and I'm going to add to that. For most of you, when you approve a payment, it's basically making a pledge, right, to the vendor. You're saying, we have approved this payment, and the vendor then kind of stops all collection activity, and then it may be 45 to 60 days before you pay the vendor. In those cases in the past, if that all happened before October, that's considered a benefit in still within the program year, even if that utility wasn't paid until 60 days later, into the new year. So what's important is that you're consistent. The benefit, when it's approved generally, and when you send out that notice of action, that's generally considered the date of the benefit, even if the vendor isn't paid for some time.
So the first step might be to look at if you reported those households in the 2022 household report, or and if not, we have to make sure that those get reported. So that's something we might need to talk about, but I think it comes down to the household report and how you've been reporting for other types of assistance.
Am I hearing correctly that we will count all payments, even if not categorized as restoration prevention? Is this for equipment? Our system classifies them into categories based on a series of questions. If they're regular, we don't report it on the performance measures report.
So I'll take this one to start, Dan, and you can correct me. This is if a regular equipment repair replacement, I know some of you, okay, how do I say this? A regular payment, whether it be equipment repair or replacement or bill payment assistance, oftentimes are used to alleviate a crisis situation. So we know many states that use a regular payment to take care of a bill that's past due or facing disconnection, which is why it's really important for you to take a look at your program, because in many cases you should be counting regular benefits if they prevented a disconnection. If a person came in already disconnected or past, or with a disconnect notice or past due, or if you restored home energy to someone that was already disconnected, whether it's a regular benefit or a crisis benefit. So it's really up to your program. You need to look at that. But that regular and crisis label, in many states, that doesn't mean much when it comes to prevention or restoration measure. What means something is the account status at the time of payment, or the characteristic of that household being in crisis or not. There's a whole supplement on this, by the way. So, in the data collection guide, which we've listed, there's a whole supplement on defining prevention and restoration. And so if you want more information, take a look at that and then give us a call.
Yeah, and one way to think of it is, do you have households that did not get crisis, but in your system they're marked as having a disconnect notice, or being low on fuel, and they did not receive crisis assistance, they just received regular? That is probably an indication that some of your non-crisis households that are facing an imminent loss, you assisted them, and it would make sense to report them in the prevention section. But as Melissa mentions, it depends a little bit on your program design, and we can help you look at that. I think we have time for one more, Nicholas.
So are we required to break down the bills and energy usage per month, or is it sufficient to just have the total of FY23 bills to compare to the yearly income?
When you go to the energy vendors, you just need to ask them for the annual amount. So you don't need it month by month, and it isn't actually specified what 12-month period you need. So it can align with FY 2023, but it can also, some states request it for a slightly different 12-month period. The important thing is that it's annual, and that you have their total main heating and their total electric bill.
And I want to underscore this, that some of you have program years that end in the summer. So you run from, July 1 to June 30th, and there's no reason to wait till November to request data. We'll take any 12 months as long as it's consistent. So if you can go to them and request data in the summer because your program's over, you absolutely should take advantage of that.
Well, as we said, we'll be repeating this in January. If you want a refresher on it, we're here if you have questions, but we've hit the end time for the webinar, so we want to let you all go and just thank you again for your time, and we hope you have a good Thanksgiving. Thank you very much.